Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice Roundup, your weekly look at conservation and sporting community news happening across the nation and on the Hill. Thanks for tuning in. This is the TSV Roundup. It's Wednesday. That means it is time for the Sportsman's Voice Roundup. Thank you for tuning in for the week of June 17th, 2024. On this week's edition, our lead story, snapper management in the Gulf states, or the Gulf area versus the South Atlantic. Two different stories there. We'll get into that as our lead story from Chris Horton. Hunting with suppressors is now authorized permanently in Vermont. CSC co-chair Senator Bozeman releases a pro-sportsman farm bill platform from Ken Keene. Merchant category coding legislation heads to the New York governor's desk from Kaylee Leager. A legislative recap brought to us by Connor Barker in Tennessee. And a special session occurring in Arkansas, also from Ken Keene, concerning the funding for the Game and Fish Commission. And then finally, a report from Marie Newmiller on technology reigning at the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Let's get into it from a hot and steamy U.S. of A. I think all of us are under excessive heat warning, and that is no different from where I sit. It is blazing hot, so hopefully tales from the snapper waters make you feel cooler. So let's get into it. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, announced last week that the 2024 red snapper season in the South Atlantic will span a grand total of 1 day. Your entire snapper season in the Southern Atlantic is July 12th. That's the season, folks. CSF firmly believes the best opportunity for better red snapper management in the South Atlantic resides with states and not the National Marine Fisheries Service. Apart from the inefficient commercial management model being applied to the recreational sector, the short red snapper season is due to NOAA's Marine Recreational Information Program's NRIP inability to estimate recreational dead discards of fish that are thrown back and assumed to die when the season is closed and the rest of the year. Many of the released fish survive, but a substantial portion do not and are counted towards the total available removals from the population each year. Population grows, more red snappers are estimated by MRIP to be encountered by anglers, which results in a high discard mortality estimate and relatively low red snapper annual catch limit available for harvest. Ultimately, despite the highest population abundance ever recorded, the 2024 red snapper season in the South Atlantic will be measured in mere hours, whereas the Gulf of Mexico, thanks to prior work by Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation and partners, the 2024 red snapper season will be measured in months for each of the states. The underlying reason for the highly disparate season structure is recreational landings data between the two regions. Regionally, anglers in the Gulf were facing similar melting point about a decade ago, so each state took charge and began developing their own recreational data collection program to supplement or replace MRIP, which was never intended for in-season management. Needless to say, the experiment was wildly successful. Thus far, the only idea put forth in the South Atlantic Council by NOAA to address recreational data uncertainty surrounding recreational landings is to implement a federal offshore permit. Anglers are hyper frustrated with federal management of red snapper and other species in the South Atlantic, so it seems unreasonable to ask them to buy a federal permit that few have confidence will get them out of the mess of the federal fisheries management system. So, if you're not fishing the Gulf, enjoy your 1 day. That's a bummer. And this kind of continues to come back to these discussions we've had with Chris, and apologies for Chris not being on the program. Well, he's not sorry. He's fishing. He's on a well-deserved vacation. So again, you got me for the lead. But I think he would agree that we obviously have data collection issues, and who does the reporting, who does the data sampling and collecting, and how to work these problems out. Sounds like the states in the Gulf started figuring something out. So maybe the South Atlantic states, where you can have a red snapper season, could look at doing something in the same. Certainly, if Chris was here, he could dive into this far deeper than I can, but interesting and disappointing nonetheless, as that is a favorite game species in that part of the world. And you're on the wrong side of the Gulf. You get one day versus many. So enjoy the fishing. More to come, I'm certain, and we'll get an update from Chris as we get them. Good news in Vermont. This is a over decade long effort that really culminates now, but a couple of years ago, through the efforts of the Vermont Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus, CSF, and our partners at the American Suppressor Association, ASA, were able to get a bill passed where you could hunt with suppressors, but it had a sunset, and that sunset was this year. With the efforts of our caucus co-chairs, especially Representative Pat Brennan, who also sits on our executive council for the NASC network. Here we go. This was a done deal. Vermont House Bill 878 took this up and was passed. And our Governor Sportsman's Caucus member, Governor Phil Scott, signed that bill into law. So now residents and non-residents, if you got silencers and you like to hunt with them, you can go to Vermont and hunt with them. So, I mean, obviously there's a benefit for the health reasons. Hearing protection, obviously, I mean, you're still using hearing protection, especially on the range, but your hearing's protected. It's a far better experience of field, better recoil management. It's good for not scaring the game away, right? So, I mean, there's that. And then, especially here in the Northeast, where we do not have great tracts of land, unless you're going way up in the great North Woods of New Hampshire and Maine, some of the Green Mountain State, but really it's crowded and we got neighbors, and most of the time you're within earshot of some sort of dwelling. And these silencers allow you to go about your business quietly and being very neighborly. And so many of those noise complaints go away, especially at the public ranges or the private clubs, where we do get those noise complaints, and it often, especially the private ones, come up to a select board or whoever manages the town or the community. And that's the first thing that comes into question is the noise. And even, I mean, in New Hampshire, I know of cases where there were established ranges and they built developments around those ranges, and then they still had noise complaints and had to adjust even though the range was already there first. So all that to say, Vermont has the advantage now of having that codified in the law that folks can use cans there, and that's good for everybody. Couple quotes I'll bring you here. One from Representative Pat Brennan. I'm very pleased to announce the passing of H. 878. This bill includes the removal of the sunset on hunting with suppressors, thus codifying into permanent law. It has been a long but rewarding process over a decade, and I'm honored to have been a part of it. The health and hearing benefits of this bill will be realized for years to come. In addition, our Vice President of Policy, Brent Miller, who really was on the groundwork of this early on in his career when he was up here where I am now, managing the Northeast. CSF was honored to support Representative Brennan's steadfast leadership on this issue over the last 12 years, alongside our friends at the American Suppressor Association. When we began working on this issue with Representative Brennan back in 2012, there was a complete ban on ownership and use. This latest and final authorization marks the fourth pro-suppressor bill Representative Brennan successfully had signed into law, and suppressors are now fully authorized for both hunting and recreational shooting for all Vermont sportsmen, women, and those visiting the state. CSF thanks Representative Brennan and our partners at the ASA for their tireless efforts over the years. CSF would also like to thank Governor Scott, a GSC member, and all those involved who helped make the use of suppressors a permanent tool for the benefit of Vermont's sporting community and their neighbors. And I will have you note, tomorrow we have a feature presentation, feature show, and we are talking about this. So tune in to the feature Sportsman's Voice podcast. That will be on June 20th as this airs. On the 19th, where we sit down with ASA's president and executive director, Knox Williams, to discuss this legislation and then so much more. Then we also sit down with CSF board member and Silencer Central CEO Brandon Maddox to further explore the benefits of suppressors and current legislation sitting on the Hill that could greatly enhance conservation funding. So definitely tune in for the feature show this week. Moving on to Ken Keen's first of two articles here. CSC co-chair Senator Bozeman releases a pro-sportsman farm bill platform. Last week, Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus co-chair and ranking member of the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, Senator John Bozeman, released his framework and priorities for the next farm bill. While differing in several ways from the priorities established by committee chairwoman and CSC member Senator Stabenow, Senator Bozeman's priorities include many provisions widely supported by the sporting conservation community. While much debate remains before a farm bill is passed by Congress, this movement highlights the ongoing support for many of our community's priorities within the important piece of legislation. While there are many key differences between the Republican priorities of the platform released earlier this year by CSC member and committee chairwoman Debbie Stabenow, it is important to note that most of these differences occur outside of the Farm Bill's conservation and forestry titles. As it relates to the titles most important to the priorities of sportsmen and women, both sides of the aisle have demonstrated general support for the Farm Bill's conservation provisions. TSF appreciates the conservation and forestry title priorities set forth by ranking member Bozeman, including the support for creation of forest conservation easement program, increased funding for voluntary access habitat incentives program, and an overall expansion in the reach of several other programs that support quality wildlife habitat conservation. CSF looks forward to continued work with Congress and the sporting conservation community as we seek to pass and enact the next farm bill. Bad news to report here out of New York. It's coming from Kaylee Leager. So where we've been talking about some good legislation getting passed as it concerns the merchant category coding, New York doing New York things went the other way with it, and Assembly Bill 9862 and Senate Bill 8479 are headed to Governor Hochul's desk for signature. The enactment of this legislation will allow for financial institutions to assign merchant category codes to retailers who sell firearms, ammunition, thus allowing these financial institutions to potentially track and/or halt purchases from these retailers. CSF worked with the New York Sportsmen's Advisory Council, NYSAC, to submit a letter requesting Governor Hochul's veto of this legislation. And if I can editorialize, bad chance. And that's just the truth of it. Not surprised here. It is New York, and this is a very New York thing. And now, unfortunately, and folks from New York will tell you that almost the entire state, upstate, the air finger quote, upstate, what they call themselves, great sporting community, not in line with this legislation whatsoever, but the dominating political atmosphere and the folks south of Albany in the big city and island area seem to influence a lot of this. So it's going. It was passed. She's likely going to sign it. And I mean, here you go. You have the light registration. We'll leave it at that. The credit card companies assigning these codes, and truthfully, with this legislation here, as it said, this is applied to retailers who sell firearms and ammunition. Well, it doesn't exclude all the rest of it. So if you go over the border to Bridgeport, I think it's got a Bass Pro Shops in Connecticut, real far southwestern corner. Or you go to any of the mom and pops or any of the do they have Shields in New York? Well, whatever. Any of the brick and mortar stores you go to, and you're just going there to get, who knows, a couple turkey calls and a thermocell, or you're going camping, you need to get a sleeping bag and a new tent. Those purchases are being tracked too because you're going to that institution that sells firearms and ammunition. Consumer privacy be damned, and here you go, New York. And another reason, keep beating this drum, and we will continue to keep beating it. You got to vote. You got to get these people out of their offices who keep enacting these awful, awful pieces of legislation that are antithetical to our to our I think our makeup in America, but specifically here, direct attacks on our sporting community and lawful law-abiding purchasers of these platforms, the accoutrement that goes with it, and and my sleeping bags apparently. Really, truthfully, government is none of your business. What I am buying at my local Bass Pro or mom and pop, it's none of your business what I'm buying at the grocery store. I'll save the civil liberties rant for another show, another time. But yeah, if this doesn't piss you off, and it should, especially if you're in New York, you should be mad as hell over something like this. And she's gonna sign it, despite our efforts. We'll work together with NISAC and other groups in the state and request that veto. But these states, just like in the Northwest, they're frothing at the mouth to get anti-gun legislation on their governor's desks and put into law. So we had, let's see, the opposite way it went. So we reported on New Hampshire passing the other way with it, so making those merchant codes illegal. Wisconsin's governor vetoed similar legislation to New York's. Other states, Utah, Kentucky, I said New Hampshire, have sought to proactively protect consumers' privacy. So this is something we can definitely be proactive about in our space. And if this is a concern to you, if you're listening to this show, it probably is. As the next session comes in, I would highly recommend that you engage at the local political level. See if you can find some legislators that are sympathetic to our community, to, well, anybody really, your privacy rights being protected. I know we would be happy to lead that charge and work to organize and get legislation like that drawn up and submitted and presented and then hopefully passed. Anyway, tough break for you folks in New York. Just get out there and vote. Get these people out of the power, the seats of authority that they have. This stuff's just going to keep happening. Let's have happier news and head to Tennessee. This coming from Connor Barker. Legislative recap. Busy and successful. Let's go to a few pieces of legislation here. You got cross files here. House Bill 1867, Senate Bill 1867 would have prohibited the hunting of sandhill cranes. House Bill 1618 and Senate Bill 1942 would have allowed for the baiting of Tennessee's wildlife on private land, taking away management authority from the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency. House Bill 2762, sponsored by caucus member Representative Rusty Grills, and Senate Bill 2223 protects the financial privacy of Tennessee's hunters and recreational shooters. Look, there you go, dovetailing perfectly. Let's go into it. House and Senate Bill 1867 would have prohibited the hunting of sandhill cranes despite healthy sandhill crane populations in Tennessee and much of the eastern United States. Regulated hunting, guided by science-based management, that is the core tenet of the North American model of wildlife conservation, poses no threat to sandhill crane conservation. In contrast, there's no specific data that supports ending the Tennessee sandhill crane season. It's an emotionally driven attempt to prohibit sandhill crane hunting that was soundly defeated thanks to the unified opposition from CSF, the caucus, and in-state and national partners. CSF spearheaded a coalition letter opposing a pair of bills. Good work. House Bill 1618 and Senate Bill 1942 would have allowed for the baiting of Tennessee's wildlife on private land. This pair of bills attempted to circumvent the TWRA's public input process used to promulgate science-based regulations, which is in line with the aforementioned North American model and the recommendation for wildlife policy formulation. CSF submitted committee comments opposing pair of bills, which would have circumvented the regulatory process for making decisions on baiting instead of legislatively dictating various allowances. Thanks to the opposition from the sporting community, both bills failed to advance and died in their respective chambers. Heck yeah. Finally, Governor Sportsman's Caucus member Governor Bill Lee signed Senate Bill 2223 into law, which protects the financial privacy of Tennessee hunters and recreational shooters with the ability to purchase firearms and ammunition at the center of our time-honored traditions. Legislation to support sportsmen and women's financial privacy while purchasing those items is critical. The legislation prohibits payment card networks from requiring or incentivizing the use of merchant category code that distinguishes a firearm retailer from other retailers. CSF provided testimony in support of the legislation. New York, take a clue from Tennessee. Well done, Governor Lee, for having sportsmen's back. I mean, that's a great report all over from Connor. But there you go. And quite frankly, the legislation language exists. So again, I'm coming back to it. If this is something you're concerned with, and we all should be, and this hasn't been brought up in your state, CSF is happy to work with our in-state caucus and our partners to spearhead legislation and get that proactive, protective language in a bill and hopefully to your governor's desk. It can be done. Unless you live in New York. I digress. Another article from Kent Keene. Arkansas governor calls special session to fund the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. Despite the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission being one of a handful of state fish and wildlife agencies whose authority is vested via the state constitution, the agency's budget is still subject to approval by the General Assembly. After adjourning their fiscal session without approving a budget for the AGFC, Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders called for a special session is a critical step to ensure that the agency can financially continue their mission on behalf of the citizens and sportsmen and women of Arkansas. Earlier this year, Arkansas General Assembly adjourned their shortened fiscal session without making an appropriation for the budget for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. Despite the efforts of leaders of the Arkansas Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus to rally support around the agency's budget proposal, the effort stalled and the session adjourned without an approval or approved budget for the agency. The special session will allow the General Assembly to rectify the situation while ensuring the agency is able to financially continue its operation in the natural state. While Arkansas's constitution does a great job ensuring the management authority remains vested in the Game and Fish Commission and is informed by those most knowledgeable and best equipped to make wildlife management decisions, the current events in Arkansas demonstrate that even the best systems can still be subject to challenges caused by difference in opinions. However, with the governor's swift action and the efforts of the leaders of the Arkansas Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus, it is unlikely that these impacts will continue past the end of the agency's current fiscal year, effectively preventing negative consequences. While Arkansas returns for the special session, the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation and partners are working closely with elected officials to address other challenges facing sporting conservation community in the state. Stay tuned for further updates as those efforts progress. And finally, from Marie Newman, who gives us a report from Wafwa. So many sportsmen and sportswomen head to the outdoors to get away from their phones, technology. So it can be easy to forget that technology has many benefits for, as well as impacts on, conservation efforts. From GIS mapping systems that will help improve sagebrush habitat to debates over hunting and fishing upgrades, technology was in the spotlight at the recent Summer meeting of the Western Association Fish and Wildlife Agencies, WAFWA. That's fun to say. During the WAFWA Commission committee meetings, state fish and game commissions discussed new technology for hunting and fishing gear while sharing their various methods for determining if those new items are consistent with fair chase. As green energy collection efforts expand and impact sagebrush habitats, wildlife managers are turning to technology to help with conservation efforts. CSF was present, staying up to date, and representing the sportsman's voice. Let's see here. From the impact of green energy technology on migrating and sensitive species to the explosion of new hunting and fishing technology, Western State Fish and Game Commissioners had a lot of ground to cover during their commission committee meeting. Arizona commissioners shared information about the process they take for approving new technology through their fair chase advisors. Commissioners also shared the impacts of solar and wind development, the various permitting processes, and the potential legislative pushes to prioritize adding solar to existing structures to limit the loss of habitat. The Sagebrush Initiative Leadership Committee delivered a presentation showing ways that Geographic Information System, GIS, mapping can be integrated into sagebrush recovery efforts. A representative from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Services shared recent findings that having just 4 trees per acre can impact grouse, reducing the likelihood of breeding success. Utilizing an academic hardware grant, the coalition set out to create a mapping system to help wildlife managers and property owners identify areas of rangeland encroachment by marrying modern satellite imagery with historical area photos. A second presentation from Washington State representatives demonstrated how mapping systems can be utilized to identify the least conflict solar siting, with the hopes of creating space for development while conserving vital migration corridors for breeding locations. Another example of the benefit of modern technology was the increase in poaching conviction as a direct result of enforcement officers utilization of social media to collect evidence that ultimately strengthened individual cases. CSF was present, as we said, and will continue engaging in future conversations around technology to ensure the sportsman's voice is represented in any new regulations. And what did we say last week? Poachers gonna poach. Poachers do dumb stuff, and they are posting it on Facebook because they are dumb. Good on them. Good on the law enforcement for getting social and finding these scumbags. That's good on them. Yeah, certainly interesting. Creates an interesting conversation. It has been for a number of years here, especially technology at our hands and disposal. You know, everything in it, aware from cell cameras, drone usage, and all this stuff comes up, and it's hard for these agencies to keep up with it in real time. Further reinforcing why agencies need to have the regulatory control at their fingertips so they can react in real time, and rulemaking should not be left to the legislatures of any state as it concerns this stuff, because this stuff gets tied up in the bureaucracy. It takes forever. Some of these bills get held hostage with, political gamesmanship, and this stuff here just cannot be subjected to that. I remember when drones came out, it's like, oh, is that fair chase? And, a lot of states deemed it wasn't, or, yeah, you can use it, but you can't hunt within 24 hours of using it. Man, yeah, there's just so much. And then you look at the benefits of that, and wildlife managers actually using drones to help, get herd counts and do moose surveys and do wild waterfowl surveys. And there's just so much good stuff that comes with it. And there's also a bad side. And, we have our managers to figure that out. That's why the AFWA system is so important. And, these regional events, if you're able to go, you really should and there's a lot of great talks. You get the agency leaders all under one roof and hear what's going on. And it's just a great few days of collaborative efforts. And getting updates and, what's working out west could work in the east, could work in the heartland and vice versa. So there's a lot of idea sharing going on, and good report there from Marie, and certainly allows for some interesting conversation. All right. As different from last week, we had a longer one here. So I'll try to keep the out brief. Thanks for all the reporting from our team. And like I say, at the end of these, as always, you can go on to congressionalsportsman.org. You can sign up for the EPUB, get these every Monday around 5 o'clock Eastern, unless there's a holiday and it kicks to Tuesday, same time, same channel. It's free. Cost you nothing but, the 10 seconds to go on to congressionalsportsman.org, drop your favorite email for, all your 10% offers from the oil people and all the special offers. We're a little bit more important than that. I hope we don't go to that junk email account, but if that's how you do it and get your toe in the water, that's fine. Then you put your real email in, but do sign up for it. Again, you're going to get the print edition of what we're doing here, and then tune in for the little extra commentary and the deep dive from our lead article. And again, going back to it, tune in tomorrow, June 20th, for our feature presentation. Again, Knox Williams, Brandon Maddox, join us. We're talking suppressors, silencers, cans, whatever you want to call them. A really interesting conversations from both gentlemen, some different areas of interest, but it sounds like as we're moving along, as more legislation like we highlighted here is getting passed to legalize the use, the owning of, and the use during hunting season, that the process is becoming a little bit more streamlined. You'll hear from Brandon that and Knox, I think, for that matter, the days of 10 months to 12 months are gone. The wait times are getting less and less. And memory serves me, Brandon even can be quoted as saying a day in some cases, which kind of wish I pressed him on. And we can probably get an update on that and find out what the conditions were around that. Because I'll tell you, if you start getting those wait times down, that starts looking a whole lot more intriguing to me and a whole lot of other people who will, have hundreds of dollars wrapped up in the equipment, plus the stamp, and then the wait time. I mean, well, people don't want to wait. So anyway, all that and more, tune in tomorrow. Thanks for bringing us along. We do this every single Wednesday. Grab the link, drop it in your socials, send it to a friend in an email. We do our best to cover all of it, and our team's out there working as hard as they can with our in-state partners and our legislative sportsmen's caucuses, even when sessions are closed, still at it, burning the midnight oil. So thanks a lot for bringing us along. Stay cool out there. Holy smokes, this week's going to be a scorcher. Hopefully get to the end of it and have some relief. So be safe out there, hydrate, all that. Find some AC wherever you're at. And we will see you all next Wednesday. Take care. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.